I'm not saying that we should disobey the law. I'm just saying that I'll do everything that I can to repeal that law.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this year, Janet Mills decided that this was, she'd found a magic pot of money that would, that would pay for the first year of Medicaid expansion. Well, what about the next year?
All right, I am Matt Gagne, the CEO of the Maine Heritage Policy Center, and we're back again with yet another gubernatorial candidate interview on the issue of policy. And we have Garrett Mason here, Republican candidate for governor, who's been nice enough to join us right now. Garrett, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Garrett, we've been talking to some of your compatriots running on both the Republican side and the Democratic side now, and the first question I tend to ask all of them is a pretty easy layup, I think, but it's a good place to get going. What is it that actually motivated you to run for governor? And since this is a policy interview, I guess the source of my question really is there something issue-wise? Is there something that really stood out to you as a need that needed to be addressed that nobody else could really do, but you could? What is it that really drew you into this race?
I mean, spending 8 years in the legislature and coming from it the way that I did, you very quickly get immersed in a whole new world that you didn't know anything about until you got there. And for 8 years, I had the unique experience of being involved in a legislature that had Republican influence. And that was something that we haven't been able to do for a long time. But we've made great progress over the last 8 years. We've done, we've had tax reform. I mean, every Mainer has gotten a pay cut. Rich, poor, middle class, they've all gotten a pay cut. Education policy, something very near and dear to my heart. We've done some amazing work giving parents and families more choice in their education. Just a couple of examples of the things that we've been able to accomplish. And I think that as Maine moves into our third century as a state, we have to put forward a new vision and kind of take stock of where we are. And I think I bring a unique set of ideals, experience, policy work to the race, and I think that combination will make me be a good governor.
I guess this is maybe a related question, but Maine obviously faces a number of challenges, which we will get to in this hour plus that we have together here as it comes to issues. But what do you think Maine's biggest challenge is? And I guess that might be the thing that might have called you to run for governor, is this need to respond to those biggest challenges and what they are. What do you really see as our number one thing?
I think, if I had to pick one issue, the thing that I hear the most from people around the state is they can't find anybody to work for them. Maine doesn't have a jobs problem. Maine has a people problem. And I think economically that's probably our biggest problem, is how do we get people to come to Maine and work here? And I think the solution is very simple. I think you go out and find them. And the next governor of Maine has to be a salesman. Like, we have to be able to go out and tell the story of why Maine's the best place in the world to live and do business, raise a family. And that's the kind of governor I want to be. We have to get people to fill these jobs, because if we don't, those jobs aren't going to be here. And I think that's the biggest, probably, economic policy facing the state. But here we are at the Maine Heritage Policy Center. You guys are a think tank, right? Mm-hmm. Policy, and I think probably the biggest overall issue we have in the state is citizens initiative process. I think it's the thing that threatens our state the most, because it can be so influenced by people from away. And we've seen the lengths that the legislature has had to go to spend time on all of these referenda that come to the legislature after they've been passed by the voters. So I think those are, I know you asked for one, but I really do think there's two.
Well, obviously they're all related to each other anyway. So I suppose you pick one and they all affect the others anyway.
Yeah.
You did mention, though, bringing people here. Mm-hmm. That, if you were to ask me, if I was running for governor, which I will never do, what the biggest problem is.
Say never.
No, I will say never. But if you were to ask me the problem that most frightens me, I guess, it's the fact that the demographics of the state have so radically changed since the time I grew up to the time of today, that I don't know what the future looks like, and it's going to present a number of challenges to the state in terms of budgeting, in terms of resource development, in terms of being able to provide services to the elderly. I mean, you name it, it's going to be basically affected by demographics. And we've been hearing about it for decades. It's not like this is a new problem. I remember people talking about young people moving away when I was in high school.
Yeah.
and yet they're still doing it. And generations of politicians have talked about the problem and said we need to do something about it. And you hear rhetoric, and you hear rhetoric, and you hear rhetoric, and nothing effectively changes this. No matter who is in office, Republican, Democrat, what have you, the problem continues to get worse. Can you be the guy to change it? Can you be the one to drive the catalyst? And if so, what is it that's actually going to do that?
I've done it. When I was working for the Lewiston Maniacs, my job was to recruit people to come and play for our team. And most of them were Canadian. Some of them were American. But we went out and did just that. You can laugh at it, you can call it whatever you want, but we paid them to play hockey, and that's a job. And so I have experience doing that. I mean, also in politics. You and I have talked at length about bringing people into Maine, and through political internships that I've offered, we've brought 54 people, I think, at this point, from all over the country to come here in Maine and live and work here, and some have bought houses here since they've been. So I mean, I've done it. I have brought people to Maine, and they become taxpayers. They've become citizens of our state, and that's what Look, I was just up in Aroostook County, and we were at the Huber manufacturing plant up in Easton, and they make Advantech plywood and zip weatherization for houses, and I didn't know that was made here in Maine until recently. And they're offering really wonderful salaries up there, and with the price of a home, you can have a really good life in Easton, Maine, working at this plant. And they're trying to find an electrical engineer, and they can't find one. And the instant answer to a lot of these questions that I get asked is, well, we need to start a training program at this college, at that college, to train our workforce for the future. But we have a problem right now. We have a problem now. We have to go and find the people to fill the jobs. And if they're not here in Maine, then we have to go elsewhere to find them. And maybe that's another university somewhere, else. But we have to do the work of recruiting and bringing people here.
It does strike me, though. I mean, this is a unique interview for me because I think of all the candidates that are running, you probably have the best perspective on what a young person wants because you're
I am one.
A young person.
Yeah.
When you look at the difficulty Maine has in filling a lot of these jobs, certainly getting people here is an issue, but really the economy is doing well in North Carolina, in Boston, in Florida, in Texas, and all these other places that offer higher wages, that offer oftentimes cheaper housing, cheaper energy, lower cost of living, more family friendly. People your age live there. There's so many other things that call to you, to living in some of these other environments. How can Maine compete with that, and how can you make a meaningful difference and get these people to come to Maine for these jobs that you're mentioning that are great places to live for cheap when you're competing against where the best man at my wedding lives in North Carolina, where he got a house twice the size of mine at half the cost, right?
Right. Yeah. And some of that's just weather. And if you're asking the governor to change the weather, I can't do that. But some of it is looking at the workforce we have. One of the things that I've also heard on the campaign trail is a lot of complaints about today's workforce, and they don't want to come to work. They don't want to have this schedule. They don't want to do this. And that's horrible, and that needs to change as well. But it can't change right now, so we have to deal with what we got. The worker of today, the millennial worker, and even younger, they're not attracted to the same benefits that some people older than us are. Like, the healthcare package is not an attractive thing to some people anymore. The 401k matching program isn't attractive. You know what it is? Flexible schedule. Housing benefit. When you have $1,100 in student loan payments every month, you can't buy a house. So a housing benefit would maybe be attractive to some of these folks. So I think tailoring your job package towards that worker is something that we need to start embracing.
At the same time, obviously, the ability of a business to offer creative packages and higher wages and everything else that would actually attract those workers is impacted by the cost that they have to pay to do their business. And when we're asking people to move here and businesses to move here, that's basically the first question they have, right? It's what does it cost for energy? What does it cost for taxes? What does it cost to do business in your state? And Maine fails in a lot of those regards. It's got advantages in some, but it does fail in a lot of those regards.
But look, like I mentioned, a housing benefit, and I'm not saying that we should pay for people's houses, but I am saying that maybe that's a benefit that some people might like, and an employer that's a builder might have a package where you come work for me for 5 years. I'll help you build your house at cost, and someday you'll own your own home if you work for me long enough, and that solves some of the longevity problem, right? And for a builder, that's an economy of scale situation where they can contribute to that. I mean, the concepts that I'm talking about are not foreign. Look what Maine used to do with logging camps. You know,
Right.
my dad's family, they came from the logging camps up in Rumford when they were there, and he was a cook there, and they provided the meals, the housing, a lot of things for those people. So,
but you can do a lot in policy to sort of encourage
Sure
the costs for businesses to be lower, right?
Yeah.
And I guess the number one that's on the mind of any Republican tends to be taxes, and I think that's an interesting place to start when we talk about this. I've heard a lot of stuff from all the candidates running in terms of what they'd like to do with the tax code. There's a little bit of a disagreement here and there about what's feasible and what is actually a goal you'd like to approach and how you'd like to do it. What is the Garrett Mason approach to taxation, specifically income taxes, and how they relate to sales taxes and other taxes in the state?
So the Garrett Mason view of taxation is the one that he's had since he got there. And it is, the income tax is one of the most perverse taxes that you can put on a populace by a government. And I believe that when you are taxing somebody's work, you're taxing their livelihood and their benefits, and their chance to have a better and more successful life. You know, you look at what we did with a 1% decrease in the income tax over the past 5 years. We saw $500 million in surplus. We saw people's wages go up. You know what else we also saw was people spent more money, and we saw a 9% increase in the sales tax. So the difference between Republicans and Democrats is very simple, and it's something I think I actually said on your show on WGAN. We, as Republicans, believe that you don't have to slice the one pie up into smaller pieces so that everybody can have a bite. You simply can go out and create and make another pie. And when you reduce income taxes, there is a benefit to society. It's not just give me my money, it's my money, I earned it. JFK said a rising tide lifts all boats. And we saw that in Maine. We're seeing that in Maine. We just got another surplus report the other day. I think it was $55 million.
I think, and I think that most conservative voters agree with that general concept, as do I think most of the people who are running when they talk about taxes. But if elected, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be setting policy, you're going to be crafting budgets, you're going to be doing all the things that actually make that rate look a certain way.
Yep. And
Governor LePage has taken the approach in the last 2 budget cycles that he would like to lower the rate to depends on what year it is, but 6.5%, 5%, whatever.
It was different every time.
Different every time. Raise the sales tax to, quote, make up the difference and offboard it to people who are visiting, and then close loopholes, and so on and so forth. What is it that you'd like to do in the first budget that you proposed? I mean, do you want to bring that rate to 0 and totally reimagine what taxes look like, or is this a gradual process? And if so, what is the process going towards?
It has to be gradual, because if you don't do it gradually, you end up as Kansas and Governor Brownback, and what happened there. It was too quick, too soon. But it's not like we can't do this. Everybody talks about, how are you going to do this? How are you going to replace this revenue? We're replacing the revenue by reducing the income tax. People are paying more. And the first thing that I would do is I would eliminate the cascade for that year. The cascade of money that goes when you have a surplus down through a whole litany of things and eventually down to the income tax. I would start by proposing that, because we do have a surplus we can deal with. If Bill Gates said tomorrow, I'm going to give the state of Maine $1 billion to eliminate the income tax, that's how much it costs, is $1 billion. We'd have to find it the next year, but I would continue on the fact that I believe in Reaganomics. I believe in the policies set forth by Ronald Reagan, and they work, and we've proven it. So I would continue to rely on that and reduce the income tax gradually, so one day that it would be at 0%, hopefully by the end of my 2 terms.
So you don't take the same approach that the governor does, that some other tax needs to be raised to make up the difference. I mean, this is something that you're basically proposing to do through growth and anytime there's growth, I know there's a Grover Norquist proposal that looks a lot like that, where you have growth applied to taxes going down every time it happens.
That and the other thing too is, and I'm not afraid to say this, I am okay with letting tourists pay for me to live here. I'm okay with that. We have 3.5 million tourists that are slated to come into Bar Harbor this year on cruise ships. That's the state of Maine is a third of that. And if those people pay a sales tax to my state to fund the government that we have, I'm okay with that. So I think just to answer your question on
Sure.
sales tax.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's it's interesting. We're going to see how it all goes if you're elected. But the issue of taxes, of course, is intertwined with the issue of spending. Obviously, that's something you know very well, being in the legislature. And we've done reports at MHPC before about say New Hampshire, and just looking at sort of how they were able to get away with not having an income tax and not having a sales tax together. Like, how are they able to afford government and what have you? And there's the constant refrain you always hear from people, which is that they have a property tax. The property tax is higher. That's how they fund their government. It's just a bit of magic.
Not much higher than ours.
And that's really kind of my point, is that it is a higher, but it's marginally higher. It's not something you would notice too much living in New Hampshire versus Maine. And depending on your community, it might not be higher.
Yeah.
More importantly, though, the reason they're able to get away with it is they spend about $1 billion less on welfare-related services than the state of Maine does. Some of
their
that's
budget is higher too.
It is.
Their biennial budget is higher, much higher than Maine's.
They have more wealth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what they're getting away with, right? They've created an environment in the state that is able to collect that money because they are sort of friendly and welcoming to that. So the point of my question here, though, is that the state budget, even under the administration of what I would consider the most conservative governor we've had in 50 years probably, has continued to grow.
Yep.
It's kept going up. And he signed a budget that went up significantly this last session. How do you attack spending? Is it possible to ever get it to freeze or shrink or go in the other direction? Because, as you know, budgets are built off the previous budget, and they just keep going up and up and up based on that. So how do you fight against that?
I think there's a couple of ways that you can do that. I think one of the things that the governor has done to stop an even further increase in spending is zero-based budgeting. You start from zero and you move and build on what you need, not automatically expect an X amount increase. And if you cut that increase, then you have all of a sudden cut that department. I think zero-based budgeting has been an effective tool in government to curb future spending.
You really think it's been used effectively? I mean,
I think it's been used. Oh, I mean, there's room for improvement everywhere, right? But I mean, I think it's a start.
It just strikes me as something that a lot of governors say that they'd like to do for the budgeting process, and then I mean, I've seen them myself. You go into committees when you're talking about budgets, and you see, the spreadsheets on the green paper and the pink paper, versus what had happened in the previous.
I think it's been used better than any other governor in history, and so I think that's a good start. I also think that when you look at spending, this is exactly why I voted against the 127th budget. In fact, I was the only member of leadership to vote against it. That we spent $300 and some odd million more on that biennial budget than we ever had before, and it was a massive increase, and it's why I voted against it. But if you have a governor that goes in and says, "Hey, we're going to spend 7.2 million, which is 7.2 billion, which is the cost of the budget, the biennial budget now," and say, "We're going to do an inflation increase and that's it. Work with it." I think that's a good start too, and that's something as governor that I'm looking at doing when I walk in there. Is just say we're going to stick with what we have and let's make it work. And because we have surpluses, we can do that. I'm an ardent follower of Dave Ramsey. I love Dave Ramsey. I've read all of his books, and it's funny to me because Moody's, the bond rating company, they said that Maine needs about $1 billion in rainy day money to be solvent, have a really good bond rating, and just have really good, efficient government, right? Yet that just happens to be the same amount that Dave Ramsey suggests that every household in America have set aside for emergency purposes. And I think that if we start treating government a little bit more like that, then we could have some real success.
So, the question of spending always boils down to the question of cuts versus growth, and we always hear cuts in growth referred to as cuts, as raw cuts. Typically it goes up 4%, and we're cutting it to 1% growth, yet it's still growing, right? That's always government accounting tricks. What is it that you think could be cut in government, like for real, like real cuts? Is there fat in the budget that you identify, and is it significant enough to actually make a really big difference in the budget?
Yeah, one of the things I will say is I'm okay with inflation increases. I mean, currency is inflated, and when you have an inflation rate that if you increase by that amount, I don't have an issue with that. But I mean, as you look at state government, there is fluff everywhere. And one of the things that the governor has had some success with that I'd like to tackle a little bit more is some of these escrowed jobs in state government that we fund, and then commissioners use them as slush funds to buy pet projects. One of the things I do disagree with a little bit that's been going on, Department of Corrections, they've been stockpiling a lot of these salaried jobs that aren't filled for new prisons. And I have an issue with that. And so I don't mind having some jobs around to fill in case there's something that needs to be managed or whatever, but I mean, there's hundreds of jobs in state government that go unfilled that money goes towards slush funds. So that's an area that I'd like to tackle.
The two biggest areas, of course, though, are the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services. They're where all the real money is. Are there things there that can be done or reformed, I guess, that would actually make a big difference in the budget, going down or freezing, or at least growing at a smaller rate than it is now?
Oh, I mean, the Department of Education, that's a subject area that I know a little bit about. In the Department of Education, the EPS funding formula is used constantly as a way to game the system for people to have more money here, more money there, depending on how many special ed teachers you have and all these things. I really believe there's probably a handful of people in this state that understand the EPS funding formula.
You're more optimistic than I am.
I can think of two right now. I'll leave their names for anonymity, but there are games being played constantly with EPS funding formula by people in Augusta and people in home districts to game the system for more money. I have some thoughts on how we might be able to attack that. I also think that as far as the Department of Health and Human Services go, we are still one of the most generous states in the nation. Even after all of the success that we have had, we are still one of the most generous states in the nation, and we are marching down this road of Medicaid expansion once again. And I think that I've never been shy about it. I'll fight to repeal that. I think it's the wrong move for Maine. This organization has done many reports on what Medicaid has done. So those are two things that I would probably tackle as far as excess expenditures in state government.
Well, we'll certainly get to healthcare in a moment, so keep that one in the top of your mind. But you did mention education. I know that's something you've been passionate about over the years. You were central to the charter school legislation, of course, coming through, and that's a really important part of school choice, obviously. We could probably spend a significant chunk of our time on this subject, but I guess let me start there. Now that charter schools are in, what is the next big thing in school choice? Is there something that you would support, something that you think is a good idea that we should be charging up the hill on, I guess, once you become governor?
The cap. The cap needs to go.
You're referring to the charter school cap?
Yes, the charter school cap. 10 schools in 10 years. We're coming up on the 10-year very soon. I think the cap needs to be lifted because what has happened is the Chartering Commission has been way more studious on that final charter because there's only one left to give. And if you're being that cautious, isn't that a sign of success?
Mm-hmm.
And we have.
And the 10 number was just arbitrary to begin with. I mean,
it was a negotiated number.
Yep.
I mean, I was negotiating with a few legislators on the other side just to see what we could get passed, and started off with no cap, and they really felt they needed that. And, you look at it now, 9 fully functioning public charter schools that are very successful. So I think the next thing in school choice, and just for full disclosure, I am for 100% unabashed school choice. I believe in it. I believe there's kids that are being left out of the system. I was one of those kids, and my sister was one of those kids. And I believe that we need to do more. The next step, I believe, while we still have an income tax, this has to change eventually, but while we still have an income tax, is a refundable tax credit for people who send their kids to another school. That's something I'd like to I'd like to charge for. I don't think the voucher system is a great system because I think you start to have ties that come in to your school. So that's something that I'd like to work on.
And obviously we have, as we discuss education, the question of funding comes in, and that's where a lot of the opponents go to school choice and being able to bring your child somewhere else and refundable tax credits and
the only time that they're
education
not
savings
okay
accounts.
with giving more money to education.
Well, yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
But that is where they go, though, and that question of how much money do we fund education and how do we fund it. You brought up the funding formula, obviously, which no one does understand. I guess my philosophical question for you.
What are you talking about? I understand.
So you're one of the 6.
Right.
My philosophical question for you, I guess, is about the role of money in education. How correlated do you view the two things together? Extra money coming into a school system, does it lead, I guess, to improved results in any way? And if not, what is the core of what makes a better education system, and how does government attack that and make sure that that happens?
I think money spent in education is just like money spent everywhere. I could use $100 bills for kindling, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use it towards something good, something that I need. And that's just how money in education is too. I mean, you have schools that I'm sure are not spending I know that aren't spending their money wisely, and you have others that are. It depends on how you spend it. So I just toured Sanford High School's new regional tech center out in Sanford yesterday, and that is going to be an amazing school, and I hope they use it to their full potential, because it's the models that work that need to be pursued. What they're pursuing has great promise. Mount Blue in Farmington. I mean, that is an unbelievable school. It is the school of the future right now. I believe in what they're doing there. So not to say that public education isn't doing good things, because it is. But it is funny to me, just to your question, that it's the only time that liberals, and that's the label, that liberals don't want to give money to education is when it's two kids that don't fit their mold, or the MPA's mold, or the MEA's mold. And I'm okay with giving money to all kids from education for school choice. I'm okay with that.
Some of this has to do with curriculum too, obviously. Of course, we have a changing way that we educate our children. I think the way that we did it in the 1990s when I was going through school is quite a bit different than what my kids are going through right now. And our performance seems to have slipped relative to that position we used to have. What role do you think Common Core has in all of this? I mean, the attempt. I mean, it's weird because it's an idea that had some conservative fingerprints on it. It had some liberal fingerprints on it. I mean, it was sort of a attempt at coming together on the idea of education, but it seems to be hated probably more by my old liberal high school teachers than my conservative ones. Right? It doesn't seem to be a terribly partisan issue. Yet there are some people who defend the system too. I mean, what is Common Core's role in Maine? How do we interact with it? And do you think we should pull out of it and reinstitute maybe the old Maine learning results?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the issues that we've had in education over the past, 25 years, is the goalposts constantly change. I think under Clinton we had Goals 2000, and then under George W. Bush we had No Child Left Behind, and then we had what was it under Obama? Race to the Top.
Race to the Top,
and
which was the kickoff for the Common Core.
For Common Core. So we've constantly been changing what it is, what success means. We've constantly changed that. So one of the things that the LePage administration has done is try to set a common path forward going forward. I don't mean Common Core, just trying to find a path forward that says these are the rules. We're going to stick by these. We're going to work with the federal partners as best as we can, because we're required to in many ways. But we're going to move forward. So I mean, there are some elements, obviously, of Common Core that need to be gotten rid of. One of the things that we did was get rid of the Smarter Balance test.
Right.
That was something that was a really good thing that we did because it was just too invasive in the life of a child. It was too invasive, and there is a line in education that has to be watched in collecting too much data on kids. I remember when I first came into office, one of the biggest talking points on the campaign trail was about the collection of Social Security numbers and merging them with a student ID at the Department of Education in Maine. And we were told up and down that that there was no way that this data would be leaked. Before I got elected in November, the data was leaked. And so we have to be very careful about collecting copious amounts of data
Well, beyond that too, I mean, my wife's a teacher, so you're obviously hitting at the hot button with me. But the amount of data collection she has to do related to performance of the students. I mean, I'm not even talking about socioeconomic information or anything. I'm talking about how they do and whatever. It now has taken over.
Yeah, it's
basically 2/3 of their time is to do that kind of thing, and they're not teaching in that time.
Yeah.
And it seems like that, to me, correlates a lot with the sort of lack of performance of so many of these schools. It seems like there's just really good teachers that are too constrained by a system of, I absolutely admit that these are well-meaning reforms. Republicans and Democrats, kind of don't want different things on this one. We all have kids. We all send them to school, right? But they just interfere so much that the teachers aren't allowed to teach and the kids are constrained by it.
Well, and I kind of stole my line. One of the mantras I've had for 8 years is just let teachers teach. Just let them teach, because we do have good teachers in this state, and let them do their thing.
So when we produce students, though, we want them to be proficient.
Yes.
As they come out the other side of the other side of graduation, and this question of proficiency-based education has gotten to be a hot topic recently in Maine politics. Of course, we saw what happened in Scarborough. I brought up that with the other folks we've interviewed here so far. It's part of the equation of what happened there. But the question of what is proficiency, how do you define it, who's defining it, how do you measure it, and is this something that, some people make the case that it's unrealistic to even expect that a student should have proficiency in everything, that there are people that have certain proficiencies and others, or other areas they're just not going to be in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying I subscribe to that, but there are people that make that argument. So what do you think state policymakers should be doing as it relates to this question of proficiency-based education? Should the law be repealed? Should it be changed? Was it a good, well-intentioned thing that ended up going wrong? Where's Garrett Mason on this issue?
I think you just answered it in your last statement. I think a lot of this stuff starts with really good intentions. And listen, what is proficiency? I think maybe it might have been too decentralized for people to come up with their own ideas of what is proficient and what is not. But the idea of saying, all right, we want you to be proficient in the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. We want you to be proficient in these certain things. I don't think that's a bad thing. So I am not for the full repeal of proficiency-based learning, because it's, once again, we're changing the goalposts again. We're changing it again. You go to some of these charter schools, they've implemented proficiency-based learning in a standard that works for them, and now we're going to say that you can't do that anymore. I don't know that that's a great idea, because there are schools that have spent a lot of time implementing this. One of the things that somebody mentioned to me along the way on this was grading. The proficient or not, 0 through 4 system.
Right.
And that I think there's some misinformation on that. You don't have to implement that grading scale. You can still do A through F. You can still do 0 through 100. You can do what you want. But let's fix it. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are some schools that have implemented this well, and it's not fair to punish them for doing.
Do you have any idea what fixing it looks like, though? Is it just giving the directive from state government that we'd like our students to be proficient in this, and then letting them figure that out for themselves? Is it?
Well, that's what we've done.
Yeah, that's essentially the core of what it is today.
Right, exactly.
So that doesn't seem to be making everyone happy. Is there a different way to design it?
And I think that the governor had proposed some interesting ideas on that. I think he proposed maybe 2 or 3 bills on proficiency-based learning and how to fix this. The Education Committee did extensive work on it, and I think it is maybe setting more parameters and maybe some definitions on what proficient is. I think maybe, and I don't know exactly how I feel about this piece of it, but maybe letting schools decide a different set of standards for them. And I think that would need some work on what exactly that is, but I've heard some interesting ideas around the Capitol on that. But I don't think the idea of saying we want you to be proficient in math is a bad thing.
So we're talking about the topic of education, of course, and we've been highlighting K through 12 education, school choice, and everything there. But there's also, of course, higher education.
Absolutely.
And that is a critically important issue for us to produce the workers that are going to be in this new modern economy that everybody's building, right? So I guess a very broad question to you to begin with on this topic. Just how do you view the state of higher education in Maine right now? Where are we at? Is it a good place? Is it a bad place?
Oh, listen, we have some amazing stuff going on at the university systems. And I'll address this in regards to University of Maine system, community college system. 'Cause
Mhm.
that's what I have, as governor, that's what I have the power to influence, right? Sorry, I mean, if you go to Thomas or Husson, you're out of my purview.
Out of your league, right?
But I think the biggest thing facing higher education right now is student debt. We have a student debt problem. I mentioned it already in this interview once. When you have $1,100 a month in student loan payments, it's awfully hard to get a house. And I think the state of higher education is really good on that front. We've done a tremendous job in the legislature, and the governor has always found a way to have money available so we don't have to raise tuition on our students. And we charge a lower rate than other state university systems do on our out-of-state students. And for the first time in a long time, but actually it might be ever, that we have a wait list at the University of Maine in Orono. That's a good thing. So I think we have some things to be proud of. I mean, and as always with everything in life, there's things to improve upon.
Mhm.
But the university system, and I attribute a large amount of that to the fact that we've been able to offer an affordable education. So I do everything that we could to make sure that
Do you think it's aligned with the economy, though? I mean, like, are the people that we're producing when you get a degree out of college, are they prepared for the jobs that they're asked to do once they get into the economy? I mean, this is of course a silly example, but are we producing a lot of people that are in like a liberal arts degree, a philosophy major or whatever for an economy that needs people to do completely other things?
As a conservative, I'm not sure that the philosophy graduates are doing exactly what I want them to do.
Right.
But let's look at Maine Maritime. When you leave Maine Maritime, you got a job.
Yes, you do.
And I think that's a place that we've done well. And it's an oft neglected area of our higher education system that I think could use more support. And whether that just be promotion or whether that be something that they need, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I think that's a place that we've done well.
The topic of trades, though, and this gets baked into the community colleges quite a bit as well.
And regional tech centers.
Absolutely. Is, of course, on the top of a lot of people's mind. And there's, I guess the question of how you promote that type of work and the need for people to go to school to learn the skills that they'll need to actually do that work. We've identified this as an issue and a problem for a while before the economy heated up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but they're good jobs that make actually a lot of money. I mean, again, go be a welder, go be a mechanic, go be a mason. Right?
Yeah.
And yet we're continuing to tell kids, go to a four-year college, go to a four-year college, go to a four-year college. You'll earn so much more in your lifetime if you do. How do we fix that? I mean, get the guidance counselors to talk about it more. How do you do that as governor?
I think we've started that. I think we have. I mean, they had a chicken and the egg problem in Sanford, right? So they wanted to teach people the trades, but they didn't have enough people in the trades to build a school to teach them the trades. I mean,
Right.
And the reason I said Masons before was because the project is behind because they couldn't find anybody to lay the brick.
Right.
And so, I mean, the trades are important, and those things can be certified in high school. I'm going to continue to use the Sanford example, but we have, they have in that new school, they have electrical. You can get your certified journeyman electrical license, I think, and then they also have plumbing there. They have all of these trade things going on in that school, and when you get out of high school, you can be a CNA, for example. You can be a certified CNA heading towards your nursing degree. So those are the things we need to continue to encourage, and the regional tech centers are a really good example of how we're moving that into the future.
At the same time, though, the community colleges seem to have become a haven for people who are looking for maybe the traditional four-year college education track, maybe a liberal arts degree or what have you, but it's just a less expensive option, frankly, for them to either get it going or what have you. It seems like they're prioritizing, and this is maybe a little bit of market demand, right? Like people want that four-year degree, but they want it a little bit cheaper, so they're finding ways to do it at the community college. Community college is responding by offering more of those programs, etc. And it seems like there are less of these trade jobs, skill jobs that they're actually working on. I mean, do the community colleges have a responsibility to maybe make sure that their curriculum is actually trying to produce these people and then work with people to get them involved in those programs, maybe promote and market themselves better? I'm not sure. I
don't know. I guess I can't really delve into that too much. I can tell you what's happened at like a place like Central Maine. As you know, my family, we have an excavation contracting company, and it's been really nice to have people come out of there knowing how to fix heavy equipment in our area. As a tooth breaks on an excavator or hydraulic hose goes, my dad doesn't always have to do it all the time now. We have people coming out of there. So, I mean, on that front, as an employer, I'm happy with it. So
yeah, it's just a question of how to encourage it, I
Yeah.
guess, is kind of what I'm getting at. But a problem that certainly we'll talk about quite a bit more as the years go by. Before we move away from higher education, though, there is something that I think needs to be addressed in some fashion that is worth talking about, too, and that's the issue of free speech on college campuses.
Oh, yeah.
We struggle with this, too, because it's something that disturbs me, what you see on college campuses where people are no longer, frankly, allowed to have certain opinions. You are prevented from bringing certain people on campus. You are shouted down. You are bullied out, and people are uninvited from coming, etc., and so on and so forth. But the question really becomes, like, what do you do from a policy standpoint to try to encourage free speech on college campus and stop that kind of thing from happening? Is there something that government should do to guarantee, frankly, the First Amendment right of every student that goes to college?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with encouraging conservatives to be more, to maybe be professors or college presidents. I think a lot of that is head down. It comes from the top. I mean, you go into a college campus nowadays, I mean, you see socialism preached from the high top, and it's very common. And I'm talking in general, I'm not, just talking in general, but I don't know that the government's role should be more than just in making sure that it is a safe place for everybody to speak their views, no matter what they are. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I'm not sure that there needs to be like a government policing arm. I think you end
I would have a problem with that. I would.
You end up getting into some real problems if you said, well, we will have free speech and you won't say anything about it. That's kind of counterintuitive. So,
Yeah.
But just ensuring that it's a safe place for conservative views as it is for liberal views.
You had brought up the topic of healthcare and Medicaid expansion specifically a moment ago, and it's probably a good time to come back to that. Obviously, you are going to be going back in session soon to deal with whatever.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think you will.
Yeah.
To deal with whatever you guys have left behind, including tax conformity and some Medicaid expansion questions. This gets tied into the referendum question, which I think we'll get to in a minute too. But it was passed. It is law, and I have heard some people, including Ken Fredette, I've heard Governor LePage say, "I'm no longer even arguing about it. It is law, and it should be implemented. I'm just arguing about how we implement it and how we pay for it and the method by which we do it." There are, however, people that say, "Nope, it should be gone. We should repeal it, and I'm not going to stop until I make sure that happens, and I'll take whatever steps necessary to do that." Where do you fall on the question?
Well, I don't think that those are mutually exclusive. I think that you can vigorously oppose Medicaid expansion, and Ken and the governor are talking about just give me a way to fund it. I'm not saying I kind of expressed my view earlier, but I'm not saying that we should disobey the law. I'm just saying that I'll do everything that I can to repeal that law. So I mean, this year, Janet Mills decided that this was, she'd found a magic pot of money that would pay for the first year of Medicaid expansion. Well, what about the next year? What about the year after that? And we end up in where we were in 2011 when we had to mortgage off liquor sales in this state for 10 years to pay for the last round of Medicaid expansion. So I will fight to repeal it. And right now, it's not completely implemented because the Democrats have not given us a way to fund it, other than pull it out of the Fund for Healthy Maine or the tobacco settlement or whatever, which actually the idea that Janet put forward isn't even really supported by Democrats. So I don't think that those two things that you just outlined are separate entities. I think they're both one and the same.
How do you do it, though? I mean, it's going to require some form of a legislative majority, frankly, behind you to do it.
That's
and
right.
if you're facing maybe say the legislature you have now, right, where you've got the state Senate in the hands of the Republicans, the state House in the hands of the Democrats. I mean,
then it doesn't get
you
done,
can oppose it all you want to, but it's not really going to happen.
It doesn't get done, does it?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to make sure you elect conservatives, and I think that's another thing that sets me apart from the rest of the people in the race. Is, you know, I've spent my legislative career in the Senate making sure that we elect Republicans and making sure we elect conservatives to make sure that we can continue on the policies that we've done. You know, I've been able to, me and my team have knocked on well over 300,000 doors in the past 4 years. So I think that we have to elect Republicans to make sure that happens. We've done it before. I mean, 2010, when that legislature came in, we did repeal parts of Medicaid expansion. We did do that, and we got waivers from the federal government. Hopefully, we can get more done with the federal government we have now. But people think that citizens initiative laws are untouchable and they're somehow quasi-constitutional.
Right.
They're not. They're just laws, just like everything else. We change them all the time. We've been changing laws about liquor sales in this country since Prohibition was ended. We'll continue to do the same with Medicaid.
As we talk about healthcare, though, I get very frustrated when I talk to conservatives, because when you ask a conservative typically what their ideas for healthcare reform are and how do you actually deliver quality and affordable healthcare to as many people as possible, make sure that we're a healthy society, broadly speaking, I do not hear a lot of ideas articulated. I hear Obamacare is bad, which it is, right? I hear that we need to do something about it, and I hear that we need to stop Medicaid, which, yet again, I agree with entirely. Yet, that doesn't really solve the core problems, and that doesn't constitute having ideas on healthcare. That's stopping bad ideas in a lot of ways. Right. What are Garrett Mason's ideas about healthcare reform? Where would you like to take it if governor?
Some of the things that I've helped to vote for and implement. We have a really great fix on the books that people in this organization helped us do. And we call it PL90 because I can't remember the LD that was passed at the time. But you know, PL90 is a great fix that's on the books right now, but we need Obamacare repealed to let it play. When we did that, we created a high-risk pool that nobody really knew they were part of if you had a pre-existing condition. And that, for the few months that it was active, it was reducing healthcare premiums, private healthcare premiums, which is important. So I think that's something that I would continue to fight for and work with the federal delegation to help them understand that Maine has started to solve our own problems. Now just let us do it. So that's number one. And you have to realize, with Obamacare, healthcare was largely federalized.
Yeah.
It was largely federalized. So to expect a governor and a state government to do all of the fixing of healthcare, it's just not possible. The other thing that needs to happen is we need to get rid of community rating. I just heard about it the other day in Ellsworth. We were talking about community rating and how the healthcare prices go up so much in places like this, and I started to explain some of that to them. And that was another thing that was implemented again under Obamacare, which we had repealed in this state. I think the other thing that we did is another bill that was promoted by folks here was when we did the right to shop bill that Senator Rod Whittemore put in. It was a watered-down version of what we really wanted, but there were some really wonderful aspects to that bill that I think could help people and make them a stakeholder in their own health care. Not just expect that, you know, Aetna's going to take care of you, but, you know, you take care of your own health care, you'll be a participant in it, and you'll get rewarded with a cash benefit. So I think those are really great free market conservative ideas to help fix our healthcare system.
You know, I've often wondered if, because you're right about the fact that once the Affordable Care Act was passed, I mean, they absolutely federalized most of healthcare, and there's only so much you can do within that type of environment. But I have wondered if things like the direct primary care industry, for instance, could almost go around it in some way. And by that I mean, you know, you're talking about completely divorcing yourself from the insurance market. Really, I mean, you're in a direct relationship with your doctor. You pay him a retainer. You see him whenever you need to. They come. Sometimes they make house calls. You know, it's a really good relationship. And if that was frankly a method and a way we delivered healthcare rather than this giant consolidated hospital model that seems to be increasingly what we do, I wonder if so much of that Obamacare argument would be irrelevant. I mean, I'm thinking of delivering direct primary care plans to people who are on Medicaid plans, and how much better their health care would end up being for so much cheaper. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if that's not something that, again, states can do to go around the leviathan that's been assembled around healthcare.
Well, and that's happening in Canada right now. You know, people are private paying for healthcare out and beyond the federal socialized system that they have there. We've seen that already, but I think the direct care model is incredible. I mean, and people are doing it here in the southern Maine area. That you can pay a monthly fee. It's just like a subscription, to like Birchbox or whatever online.
It's like having a lawyer on retainer or something.
It is. It's just you have that person. They're there for you. They have. People are saying, well, what about the more serious stuff, right? It's like, well, they can rent an operating room. They can, there's things they can do. So
most of your care is with a primary care physician, though, so it does make perfect sense that it would take care. It's just, I wonder if there's also things that you could do to make it easier to actually have that kind of a relationship with the doctor. Yeah. Because you basically have to have insurance on top of that retainer as well. So if you could have like a truly catastrophic plan, maybe, like really.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like the Mac Chuck plan makes sense then. Like, when I say that you got to get hit by one for it to be used, but it's good to have it.
Right.
And that way you can kind of balance the both. It's like private pay Medicaid Part D, Medicare Part D. So I think encouraging that model would be great.
Also, in the topic of healthcare, before we move on beyond it, of course, everybody talks about the opioid crisis. It's topic A or B on most people's lists, but only because we see it every month. The statistics continue to go up, and it seems like there are worse and worse numbers every time we look at them. As it relates to gubernatorial policy that you could actually implement if elected, what is it that we could do to actually attack this problem? Because from my perspective, as just a civilian out there watching this and involved in the process, I hear a lot of talk at the legislative level that we need to confront the crisis. I hear a lot of congratulations and backslapping every session because we did something that addresses it, and then I read the paper a couple weeks later and it's another 30 or 50 people have died than the previous year, and it doesn't seem to be working. So are there things we're not doing that we should have been doing, that we should have passed, that we didn't?
Well,
any ideas?
And I hate to say it this way, but I think one of the things that we're doing is part of the problem is in the question you just asked, and it's how is the government going to fix the opiate crisis? There is some things that we can do. One of the things that we've done that's been successful has been prescription monitoring. That's had some success in making sure that there's just fewer opiates out on the street. But one of the things that frustrates me, especially amongst conservatives, is the question that's asked. Is the government's going to fix this problem? They're going to force them to get treatment. Well, talk to any treatment program. I don't care if they're more liberal-based, faith-based, whatever you want. Every one of them will tell you, you cannot fix that person's problem until they are ready to fix it. And once they are, then we need to have things available for them. But we also say that, it has to cost money. We have to have a big fancy recovery center, and it has to cost money. No, it doesn't. We need to do what works. What works? Well, faith-based peer-to-peer organizations. They work. 65% success rate. Let's not rebuild the wheel. Let's not do that. And one of the things that I want to do, and I've been criticized for this, but I want to open an office of faith-based initiatives in the governor's office, because connecting people with the resources that are out there, while they might not be plentiful, they'll still be helpful. And I think there are some treatments that are being missed because there isn't a connection into DHHS for them. So I think that would be something that's very important. George W. Bush did it in his administration around 2003-04. So that's something that I'd like to pursue because it's been successful.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer to that question, because you're right. The way I phrased it was probably a little clumsy. When I say what can government do, I guess my brain actually starts circulating around the question of Medicaid, because you look at the statistics, and opioid abuse and deaths from opioids are actually worse in states that have expanded Medicaid versus haven't. So that's one of those arguments.
I didn't know that.
It is actually significantly higher, and the argument basically is that you're bringing people into an environment where they're getting care, and then they're prescribed opioids, and they're getting hooked on a drug, and then of course they're looking for something to fill the gap once they don't have it anymore, and then that's making the problem worse. So government can do a lot of those types of things to try to mitigate those circumstances. But I think you're probably right about this. That there are larger societal questions about this that are not necessarily government's ability to even impact.
No, and people are trying to fill a hole. And I don't mean to get ethereal on this, but they're trying.
Speaking of those philosophy degrees, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think people are trying to fill a hole, and I think you see this happens. It starts in rural poor areas, and I think there's a hope issue there. And I think when you have a job and you have something to live for, and you're working hard and working towards building a future, I think some of that problem does get solved. Not all of it.
Yep.
Some of it's deeper than that. But I really am on a kind of a one-man mission as I go across the state to get people to rephrase that question. Is how can we be there to help instead of how is the government going to fix this? Because I don't think it can.
Yeah. Let's move on quickly to government reform here for a moment. And by government reform, there's about 1,000 different things that I could fit under that category, of course.
Category.
But let me start with how we govern. And we've brought up referendums a few times here in this conversation already. We're sort of dancing around the big question here, which is how to tackle the issue of referendums. They are increasingly being used, and when they're being used by special interests that have a lot of out-of-state money that is being pumped into the state to experiment on insert policy here, right? And I think the only reason that conservatives don't do it is because we don't have the same donors that are interested in playing. It's not a philosophical thing. I think we'd probably use it and abuse it too.
Let's just be honest about it.
Right. Yeah. So I guess my question to you is the process as it exists right now. Is it something that deserves to stay and be fought for, and maybe we just approach how we deal with the questions and how they're funded, and whether they're fair fights and things like that, or is it so fundamentally broken that we need to have a wholesale fix of the referendum process?
Well, I would say to those who are, who would like to get rid of it completely, good luck. I just don't see that happening. I think you'd have to get a constitutional fix, and I don't think the people are going to vote to take power away from themselves. So that's number one. Number two, the process is crazy broken. We have seen this over it really has grown, and I don't know if you'd agree with this or not. During my 8 years in the legislature,
absolutely.
That's the time that it's been done, and it's because Democrats can't have their full way in the legislature anymore, so they got to go out and put all their initiatives on a ballot and make it sound good. But I do believe there's things that we can do to fix it, because we only have two options. We can either fix it so that it's fair for everybody, or conservatives are going to have to get better
at doing
it.
Right.
That's the only chance that we have. So I have a couple of suggestions on how we do fix that problem. Some are constitutional, some are statutory, so that we'd have to get them passed in the legislature. But I think the first thing starts, and you cannot stand outside the main ball in Portland and just collect a bunch of signatures. You have to go to Bangor. You have to go to Lewis and Auburn. And I think congressional districts is the most logical, common sense way to get that done. I also think that the governor should have veto power over a citizen's referendum, just like they do in the legislature. And then if the governor vetoes a people's referendum, then it can go back out instantly for a people's veto, just like it does in the legislature. I have a bunch of ideas on this. I don't know how far deep you want to go into it.
It's up to you. It's your conversation.
I also think that it shouldn't be attached to certain legislation. And if it is, it needs to be able to be adjusted. Right now, when people's veto comes into the legislature, we cannot fix it. We can have a hearing on it, but we can't fix it. And so that if it wasn't connected like they do in Australia, in Australia they say, do you want to do this to the people? It's a poll question. And if the answer is yes, well, Congress is required to act. So I think that's a good model as well. But there's a lot of things we can do to fix it.
Do you think that it would be worthwhile to pursue? I know you're correct in saying, or at least I think you are, that it would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to get people to vote to curtail their own rights. But I wonder if it would be more possible to ask them for a sort of logical, common sense adjustment to it.
Yeah.
Like, for instance,
yes.
Referendum questions can't be used for tax hikes or for massive fiscal questions that impact the state budget. Asking whether or not to approve gay marriage, right? For instance, that's like a societal, legal issue that I think, I really don't necessarily have much of a problem with the people deciding that kind of question.
Yep.
But should we raise taxes by this incremental amount in this subsection of that paragraph that's actually going to be doing this, and it's actually a 3.8% tax hike, but 1.9% comes from this? I mean, you're talking about things that really should be debated in open committee at the legislative process, amended and changed and debated and having testimony on behalf of. I mean, they're just so complex,
and it's
even for the most plugged in person.
It is, and it's so funny because that same person that argues against what you just said would say, well, we do have a public hearing process. It's an election.
Right.
And they have money pour in from George Soros and everybody else you can imagine that's for left-wing causes. It's like, I want to ask the same question. Well, why don't you just ask people, to sew on a patch of whatever corporation that they want in the legislature that's supporting them? I mean, because that's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're buying an election in many cases, and it puts the opposition at a natural disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even start until they do.
Exactly,
They've filed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then who is that?
Yeah.
Who is doing that opposition? Right. And many times it's fallen in traditional cases to the Maine Republican Party,
mm-hmm.
and they're just not equipped to do that. And the Democrats have gotten very good at outsourcing their referendum so that they don't have to touch it. And but we have a massive problem on our hands with this. And if we want to get really into the weeds for a minute, and this is a think tank organization, so
what we're doing it for. Right.
But is the citizens referendum process guaranteed to us by our United States Constitution? We are promised a Republican form of government, and a Republican form of government is not direct democracy. And so I would find it very interesting if a question came to the United States Supreme Court on citizens referendums in the states.
You highlighted, this is sort of something you've already answered, but I do find it an interesting part of this conversation, the legitimacy of the referendum process itself and the will of the people, the phrase that you hear a million times over, right? Why is it considered so sacrosanct? Why is a law passed by the people somehow more legitimate than a law passed by the legislature? It's a rhetorical question, right? I think I already know your answer to it. But it's interesting to me that as we debate this, that's always the argument that's used. This is what the people's will is, and it's the expressed will of people. And it's not. It's the will of a fraction of the fraction who showed up, of the fraction who were registered, of a fraction certain age group of the state of Maine in an off year. Yeah. I mean, that's not the express will of the people. That's much more specific than that. So how is it? I mean, how is it that we've come to this point where the will of the people is expressed in that kind of a vote, and it's somehow considered this untouchable, unquestionable law that has been created in a very special way?
Because we're Americans, and the first thing that we hear, in any government civics class is "we the people," and it's an easy thing to pervert. And we do not believe in this country in direct democracy. We don't. It's not in our founding. We believe in representative constitutional government, and the perversion of this process, what was used a handful of times for decades, is now being used as the preferred method of governing for the Maine People's Alliance. And they've gotten very good at what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the referendum process gets baked into some of the things that have been passed via referendum. We've already talked about Medicaid expansion, obviously. Ranked choice voting, though, is got to be at the top of your mind right now, being central to the election that you're running in.
Yeah.
What to do about ranked choice voting? I mean, the art of the possible is the sort of core question here, right? It really comes down to what you think can be passed in a legislative setting to address the issue. And frankly, the legislature tried.
Yeah.
And now we're living through another referendum on that, and that's going to be an unfairly fought referendum where money will be on one side and not on the other. How do you respond to that? I mean, is the Maine GOP on the right track with a sort of legal challenge to this, basically allow us to run our own primary, leave me alone kind of perspective, or is there some other method of trying to tackle it?
And it's hard to answer that question, right? Because everybody's like, well, you might benefit from this way, and you might benefit from that way. But I mean, just as a legislator that's been fighting this for 8 years since I first got there, is when we first started hearing about ranked choice voting. And defeated it every time, by the way. I can tell you that people were lied to about this. Like, they flat out lied to. I mean, you know, on the internet lives forever, right? And you go back literally to the Wayback Machine and read the ranked choice voting website. They flat out lied and told everybody it was constitutional. And we have constitutional scholars, see? And, you know, told everybody that's what it was. It wasn't. And ranked choice voting is probably one of the best examples of perversion of the process that you can visibly see. We actually worked together as a legislature, Republicans and Democrats, to repeal this and say you have to do this right, you have to do this constitutionally, and there's a process laid out for that. So we've done everything. And now it's up to the people. But this is an example of you're able to put anything you want on the ballot, even if it's unconstitutional.
Obviously, one of the other issues, obviously, that has been part of the campaign, specifically with you, is the clean election issue. I'm not going to ask you about how you interact with it in the campaign and whatnot, but I am curious about sort of how you would approach it if elected. I know you've been an opponent of it in the legislature, voted against it in the legislature. Obviously, you're using it for the campaign. Is this something you would actually pursue to get rid of still after being elected if you were to get it this way?
I think that there's some modifications that need to be made to the clean election process. I can tell you this. To anybody that decides to tell me that it's welfare for politicians, I would invite them to go collect $4,800 $5 contributions from people all over Maine. It's a lot of hard work, and it wasn't easy. But you know, most of the legislature right now is Republicans and Democrats are running under the clean election system. I would pursue a cutback. Yes, I would. But
do you think governors should have it? I mean, I know that in the environment you're in now, I mean, I'm not judging anybody on this.
No,
but
and it's a fair question to ask. I voted to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But in the budget that Governor LePage signed, and I think 181 members of the legislature voted for it, they explicitly put that funding back in. And I don't think that we in the legislature put money into something and say, well, this is only for Democrats. This money is only for Democrats, and we're just going to cede that ground. No, like, you walk into the fight wanting to win, and you know, and this is as honest as the day is long. This isn't a knock against Sean or Mary or Ken, the people I'm running against, but I don't have $500,000 to put in my own race. When you look at history, history is our best teacher. I've talked about a lot of history today, and in the past, there's rarely been a candidate that's raised over $350,000 in a primary election. So you either have to be wealthy, once again, not begrudging anyone, or you have to have incredible inside fundraising prowess. And so there's some subject matter I think we could go into on why I think that's the case. But when I got into this race, I didn't get in it to prove a point. I got in it because I think I'm the best candidate to be governor of this state, and that provided us the best opportunity.
You know, as you look at the program, though, I mean, talking to the legislative candidates that use it, just as an example, the Republicans didn't used to use it, even though it was available, but now they sort of feel like they have to compete. And that's the concerning thing about the program to me, frankly, is the fact that now people feel forced into using taxpayer dollars in order to compete with other people who are using taxpayer dollars for campaigns like this. And now we're spreading around. And on top of that, how much money does it actually take to run a House campaign and a Senate campaign? You know, we tripled it. Right, but
the money in politics.
But now it's just being used to swarm voters with even more media hits and even more campaign.
$17,000 for a House race.
Yeah, that's insane.
Crazy. I mean, that's not what everybody.
Do you think there's any legislative momentum for maybe knocking that back down to something rational?
Honestly, I don't know if there's any legislative momentum for that. But I can tell you this: we as Republicans have to stop just taking a sword just to take a sword. Like, win, then you can change it. And that's the message I have on that, because let's just be honest. If it wasn't for the Clean Elections program, I wouldn't be in this race, and there'd be a few others that wouldn't be in this race either. So we have to decide: are we just going to allow people that have a lot of money to be in the race, or are we going to train people to be fundraisers and raise money and do it the traditional way? But that's not what we have in front of us right now.
I think the last big subject I want to get to before we wrap up here is the subject of energy. And I could have touched on it earlier when we were talking about cost of doing business. But as you know, I think from your background especially, you know, the cost of energy is a significant factor in whether or not people are able to afford to do business or not. I mean, there are bills that are going into the hundreds of thousands of dollars and plus trying to afford this. Maine is better than its New England neighbors
Yep.
at the cost of energy. Yet, obviously, nationally, it's not competing in the same way that a place like South Carolina or North Carolina might, for instance.
Yep.
What can realistically be done to get that cost down? I mean, we've heard some things from the LePage administration, obviously Hydro-Quebec and whatnot, but what do you plan to pursue, if elected, to actually get that cost for consumers down and for businesses down?
My goal for Maine as governor would be to be the first thing would be flexibility. We probably could rewind some tape from 3 years ago that natural gas was the panacea of our energy problems. Now you don't hear about that at all. You hear about oil, and that's changing right now. But my case in point, it's going back up. So we have to be able to be flexible. Energy is calculated on a millisecond by millisecond basis, and how much it costs and what we're buying through the ISO grid. So we can't just say, this is it. This is going to be it for us. I think Hydro-Quebec provides us an incredible opportunity. I think I can't remember the name of the project, but the big dam that they're building up in Labrador provides us with an incredible opportunity. I think hydro has been completely bastardized as well, it's not really green. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Unless the Earth stops rotating and the moon falls out of the sky, you're going to have flowing water down a river. And that is renewable, it's clean, and it's proven.
As opposed to the windmill whose mountain you had to blow off to get there. Right?
That's right. So, I mean, there's a study out there that was done 4 years ago, and it identified 54 megawatts of electricity on our rivers here in Maine that could be utilized. And not to say that there's more out there, because there is, but these are 54 megawatts that are like realistic. They could be done, and that is a lot of energy for this state. The other thing, which is a little bit more futuristic, but I think it's absolutely fascinating, is something I learned from my friend who's the majority leader of the state senate in Hawaii. Yes, he's a Democrat, and I was flying in there one time for a conference. Everybody had a solar panel on their roof, and I asked him. I said, "Do you guys have a problem?" He said, "Oh, we got brownouts all the time." I said, "How do you fix it?" He goes, "We plug into a nuclear submarine at Pearl Harbor." We happen to have a nuclear submarine base in Portsmouth, and that nuclear energy is always there. And I think there's based on what they've done in Hawaii, I'd like to see
explore that
the
a little bit.
possibility is there.
Yeah.
I know it's a little futuristic, but hey, think outside the box,
hey,
right?
Future's now, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, you hear things about the 100 megawatt cap and things like that, which you were of course alluding to with the hydropower. Do you think that there's any room for movement in the regional greenhouse gas initiative? I mean, is there
I hope so.
something where you could pull out of that, you think? I mean, you see New Jersey do that. I mean, if New Jersey can do it.
Well, they did it under Chris Christie, so that's a whole different story.
But
still. I hope so. It's a scam. It's a complete scam. I know it was, when I first got into the legislature, there was, and I think I might have even co-sponsored one to pull us out of Reggie. But I don't know if they'd be moving on it or not, but we need to. We need to, and I'm sure were I governor, it would be something that would come up in a budget planning meeting around November. So. Yeah.
Well, my last question for you is actually related to my first. Obviously, we've talked about a lot of stuff in the hour and 20 minutes or so that we've had together. Probably some stuff we missed as well. Out of everything we've talked about, or everything that you would have liked to have talked about that we didn't, is there something that stands out to you as a passion of yours that you just have to deal with? If you're elected governor, you want to be remembered that the Mason administration did this. This is my legacy. What is that thing for you?
I don't know that it's a legacy more than an attitude. I kind of alluded to this in my opening remarks with you, is the next governor of Maine, and I really want it to be me, needs to be an ambassador to the world. We have spent 8 years looking inside and figuring out what our problems are and addressing many of them. And we've done a good job. Now, to reverse 40 years of Democrat policy in 8 is, anybody who thinks that that's possible is crazy. But we have so much more work to do. And I think the next governor needs to go out, find the opportunities in the world, and bring them back here in Maine. We have to sell our state. We have something incredible to sell. And I think that I have the ability, the knowledge, and the experience to do it.
All right, Garrett Mason, Majority Leader in the State Senate and Republican candidate for governor, has been nice enough to join us here for a policy conversation. As we are doing with all candidates, we are inviting everybody to possibly come. We hope they all say yes. We have most of them scheduled. So stay tuned for more from the Maine Heritage Policy Center.